Hey you guys, it's me, and welcome to a GameMaker Studio 2 tutorial. Today's topic is everybody's favorite, cameras, views, windows, and displays. Pretty much everything you need to know in order to get your game looking correct on a monitor. So I've got some code I'm going to share with you guys. I'm not going to write it live because it's complicated and I always get it wrong. There's an object that I usually abstract it all into. I'll walk through that with you guys. I'll give you the code, and I also want to just quickly go over conceptually how all this stuff works, because I think that's really going to help you when you're writing the code. That's true for me. Understanding this stuff has really helped. So I guess the first thing I want to talk about is the difference between those four things: the camera, the view or viewport, the window, and the display. So if you think about it, at the highest level we have the display, which is this guy here. This is your monitor. That's the thing that's actually plugged into someone's computer, the display. Onto the display, you are going to put your game window, which is this guy. And I accidentally left my exit button behind. The window is where all of your game content is going to end up. Normally it's going to be the same size as your display. So, I've got them separate here so you can tell the difference. And I think that's why it's easy to get them confused, because they are often the same size. Like any game that's full screen, yeah, it's going to have the same width and height as your display. But that's your window. So in the window is where your viewports go. And again, normally you're going to have one viewport that's the same size as the game window. So you're seeing why, this is all so confusing, because normally it's like all three of these rectangles are the same size. But what's interesting is you can have multiple viewports to a window. And I'm trying to think of a situation where this might be useful. Perhaps like if you've played Five Nights at Freddy's, there's a camera, on different areas. You could have different viewports set up on the window to display those different cameras, because you can have one active camera at a time per viewport. So that's a way that you could have, multiple cameras going in your room, displaying different things all on the screen at the same time. But just, keep in mind, a lot of the times this window will be the same size, the viewport will be the same size as the window, and the window, if it's full screen, will be the same size as the display. Now I guess the last piece that we care about is your actual camera, displaying whatever's going on in your room. So this is actually not accurate. This camera, my image is not going to scale nicely, but it should fill the viewport. If the camera is showing a smaller section of the room, so like let's say your viewport is 500 by 500 pixels, but your camera is 300 by 300, it's going to scale up whatever is happening in the game to fit that 500 by 500. So this is actually kind of accurate here, where like if we, scale this guy out to fill the viewport, it gets stretched a little weird, and that's because the camera resolution, the width to height ratio, is not the same as the width to height ratio in our viewport. So we end up with some distortion. So keep that in mind. Just like getting this image to scale properly, we should have had them be the same width to height ratio. The same is true for your cameras to your viewports, and viewports to windows and so on. So yeah, there's a lot of this width to height ratio you have to keep in mind. But those are your moving parts. Let's jump over to the code now. So if we come in here, you see I've got an object already set up. It's object CameraControl is just what I like to call it. That's what it's doing. It's controlling the camera. And it's got two events: a create event to set everything up in your room, and then a draw event to actually move the camera around following your player. So in the create event, you'll notice I have a macro here, default view 0. That's just because there is a views array. The only view I care about, because I have one that's going to be the same size as my window, which is the same size as my display, I only care about view at array position 0, so I just macroed that to know that that is my default view. I have an enum here with different screen resolutions, and this is so when I'm testing a game, I can hit Alt and it'll zoom my view out, zoom my camera out really within the same view, but it gives me a bigger picture of the screen. And then if I hit Control, it'll show me the whole room. So that's just kind of what's going on with this enum here. You guys don't need to worry about that too much. That's mostly for my own testing purposes. Where the code gets interesting is down here. So this first chunk of code enables the view, and sets it to be the same size as the display. And in this case, the window is going to get set to the same size as the display as well, but that happens second, even though I talked about that first. So the first thing I'm doing is getting the display width and height. There's convenient functions for those. And then I'm enabling views for the room. So you can do this in the room itself. If you come down to viewports and cameras, there's a checkbox, enable viewports, but I did it right from the code. I think that's easier than doing it in the room, because like if you change the room later on, you don't have to worry about it. As long as this object ends up in your room, it's just going to work. So we enable the views. We're going to set that default view 0 to true, to visible, I mean. Visible is set to true. And then the height of the viewport and the width of the viewport are going to be set to the display's width and height. And then this chunk of code is resizing and centering the window. So it's asking for an X location to put the window at, a Y location, and then also a width and a height. Hello again. So I realized I had a bug right off the bat in where we're setting the window. Before, the code had been set up to just center the window, so the X and Y was at some offset from the top corner based on your view size. Because I have it the size of the display, I can just put it at X is 0, Y is 0. Alternately, I could put it at the display height minus the view height, and then the display width minus the view width over 2. That would, it works out to be 0 in this case anyways. But this is simpler. I'm not going to add that to be confusing. The point is not to get your math exactly right in this video. The point of this video is just to say, okay, here's how to set up your views and cameras. So if your window is going to be the same size as the display, yeah, just put it at X0, Y0, and then give it the width and height of the display. And then there's the surface resize. I found this doing some research. I'm not totally clear on how surfaces work myself. If anybody has insight, please throw it in the comments. I have a vague idea, but I don't want to try to explain it and say something wrong. So just resize your surface, your application surface specifically, to be the same size as whatever your window is. And then, last but not least, we're going to make a camera. So if you use this camera create view, it's going to let you specify the size. I filled that in with my enum up here, but whatever you want the camera to display of the room, that's how big you should make this. So in my case, it's going to be 960 pixels wide by 540 pixels tall, but it's going to expand, scale up to fill that viewport like we talked about. So it's going to end up expanding to be 1920 by 1080. So, 960, stretch that up to 1920. What is that? It's going to be 2. So every 1 pixel in your room is going to basically double. So the thing is, it scales nicely. So it'll size up, it'll look good. And then last but not least, you're going to set the camera in your view to be the camera you just created. So yeah, I guess the last important note here is you want your resolution to probably be 16 by 9. That's kind of standard. That's going to scale properly with your display. So whatever you pick for a width and a height for your camera, make sure that the ratio between them is 16:9. And then the last little bit of code here in the draw is to actually move the camera. This chunk we're not going to worry about. This just resizes it. So if I hit the Alt key here, it's going to give me a bigger camera. That way I can see more of what's going on. If I hit Control, it's going to fill the room. That's, like I said, mostly for me to be able to test my games. I can see what's going on. But what's really important is we're going to grab that camera we created, and then we're going to get the width and height of the camera, which, we know what it is because we're setting up here, but I just grabbed it again to, regardless of what it gets set to, I have the correct width and height. And then you set the view position of that camera to be centered on your player. So just to explain this code, because it looks a little bit gross at first glance, the camera set view position is asking you for an X and a Y. So the X that you want is basically the player's X minus half of your current camera width. And that's going to, because it's going to start with the camera right on your player and then scooch it over by half. But you want to put some stipulations on it. You don't want it to go outside your room, off into oblivion, and you also don't want it to, you don't want it to go off your room in this direction, so 0, and you don't want it to go off your room in this direction out into oblivion. So that's the point of this max min stuff right here. Is this basically saying the lowest you can get is 0, the highest you can get is the room width minus the view width, the camera view width. And that way, you're not sliding past the boundary of your room in the X direction, nor are you doing it in the Y direction. So just stare at that code for a little bit and think about it. It will make sense. And I'm going to go ahead and show you the code. You can pause your screen if you want to. So this is the create event. We're enabling the view, setting it to the size of the display, and then we are resizing the window and the application surface to be the same size as the display, and we're centering it. And we are creating a camera of the size we want and making that the camera for our view. And then drawing, this is basically just moving your camera so that it follows your player. Last but not least, make sure your camera control is in your room. I've got it up here. And we can see if I go ahead and play this, that we are now full screen. The camera is not going past the edge of the room. However, it does move with us as long as we're within the bounds of the room. So there you go. Let me know if you guys have any questions. Throw them in the comments down below, and I will try to get back to you. So thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.